Welcome to this edition of La Miranda Living. Today is July 19th, and it is a beautiful evening here in La Miranda. We have a very timely guest here this evening. I think most people in the La Miranda area, certainly Moraga, will know his name and know his function. But his name is Bruce Burns, and he is the Superintendent of Schools. Hi, Bruce.
Good evening.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Great. I before we get into this, you've got to give us some insight into the room that you are holding this interview in.
I have two daughters. One is a teacher working in Boise, Idaho, teaching high school biology, and I am in her bedroom. And my second daughter's room has become a place of arts and crafts and study for my wife. This seemed to be the best location.
Nice. All right. Well, let's get to it. This has been a crazy time, and you are being sort of caught up in a lot of really heavy decision making and probably politics and a lot of important policy making in real time. And we know that it's not all decided. The dust has not settled, but we wanted to hear from you about where things stand with the big decisions about whether or not Moraga schools are going to be reopening in the fall and what that will look like. So just to get us moving, is the plan right now, has the plan been decided? And if so, what is the decision?
Yeah, a lot of information has transpired the last couple of days. Yes, the Moraga School District will start via distance learning. Governor Gavin Newsom held a press conference on Friday, and he unveiled new guidance for schools that he characterized as a mandate and is far more prescriptive than any other previous guidance we've received. The new guidance states that any district that resides in a county that has been placed on the COVID-19 monitoring list would have to conduct distance learning instruction until that county sustains a 14-day decline in cases, which is required before a county can officially come off the state's watch list. Once a county comes off the monitoring list, districts will then, as will the Moraga School District, have the discretion to implement reopening plans. I do want to note that prior to the governor's press conference, all school districts were planning for the reopening of schools, as was the Moraga School District. Moraga School District's plan to reopen schools, a 90-page document that was developed this summer by a 33-member representative group, can be found attached last week's board agenda, as well as this coming Tuesday's board agenda. There's a tremendous amount of information in there relative to the work done to date.
So prior to the new executive order, I guess it was an executive order by the governor, basically imposing this decision on the districts. Was Plan A to start in a hybrid model? And did Plan A then all of a sudden become Plan B at the last minute? Or is this the direction you were moving anyway?
Yeah, good question. So our task force has been meeting since mid-June. And as that work progressed, we were definitely leaning towards a hybrid model. In fact, if one looks at our plans, they'll see multiple versions of different models. Only in the last couple of weeks did we start moving away from that position, and it was primarily due to what everybody is hearing around the number of increased cases of COVID-19. So at last week's governing board study session, we pivoted from where we were a few weeks ago and presented a recommendation to the board to move forward with distance learning. It just so happened that occurred Thursday before the governor's announcement on Friday.
So that did not give you all a lot of time. Your decision pivoted, but as far as doing the legwork to start school when it was intended or is intended to be started, do you feel like you are going to be ready to launch into a distant learning mode come August 13th?
Yeah, we will. We'll have to be. And our work on distance learning started mid-June. And parents, community members, staff can look at our plan and see the work that we've started. In addition to the work that we've started, there's new legislation that we must adhere to relative to distance learning planning. Senate Bill 98 requires daily live interaction with teachers and peers as part of regular instruction. It requires an accountability plan, daily tracking, weekly monitoring to verify participations, access to connectivity and devices. We must present content at a level that is substantially equivalent to in-person instruction. We must provide academic and other supports to students not performing at grade level, and we'll need to continue to provide the necessary accommodations for our English language learners and our students with disabilities. So in addition to the Friday guidance for opening schools, we also have specific provisions per Senate Bill 98 that we must adhere to in opening school via distance learning planning.
In Senate Bill 98, when did that pass?
That passed June 29th, maybe the day after. It was an omnibus trailer bill to the California State 2021 Budget Act.
Okay.
So about that time frame.
Okay. And this applies across the board to all public schools in California?
It does indeed, yes.
Does it also apply to private schools?
It does not apply to private schools.
Okay. I have a lot of questions before we sort of end the fact that, the decision sort of has been made for you all regarding how you're going to start the school year being distant learning. I understand that there was the ability for there to be a single exemption that could be granted by local health officials if you so petitioned as a superintendent with support of stakeholders locally. Is that something that you would consider exercising if there was pressure by the parents to actually push back on the decision to start with distant learning?
Jennifer, I've been meeting with county health officials every Monday, along with all superintendents. And I've also seen the press conference, and I'm not aware that the governor delivered on Friday. I'm not aware of a specific waiver that you mentioned. However, what I'll say is, even if there was a waiver opportunity, the task force has recommended that we begin school via distance learning. And had the governor not come forward on Friday with a mandate as he did, I would have presented that recommendation to the governing board on Tuesday. And just a note on the task force, we had parents who are doctors, teachers, administrators, classified employee staff, teachers. We had 33 members representing the Moraga School District who've been meeting again since mid-June and have done in-depth work to support the recommendation to open up by distance learning and the specific hybrid model that we'll bring to the board Tuesday.
So maybe this is not something you can speak to with confirmation, but eventually, assuming that we get out of the we're no longer a watchless county and we are given the green light to move to the hybrid model, has it been decided what that hybrid model will be? I know there's been lots of different scenarios of being, one cohort being 1 week on, another cohort being the next week, maybe Monday, Tuesday versus a Wednesday, Thursday. Have there been decisions about that, what it's going to look like, that hybrid?
Yeah, and just to add a little bit more information to the prior conversation,
Sure.
I want our listeners to know that while the state has mandated considerations for reopening, the Moraga School District will look at county transmission, La Marinda transportation transmission. We'll need to make sure we have enough PPE for our teachers, face covering for students. We'll be looking at school outbreaks, plans for closing classrooms, individual classrooms, reopening them. We'll continue to follow public health guidance. Our subcommittee on public health has looked at ventilation for classrooms, and we'll also need to pay close attention to the challenges of getting tested right now. It can often take 3 or 4 days to get a test and up to 9 or 10 days to get results. Those are all additional considerations that the Moraga School District will consider. In regard to your question about hybrid models, our committee, instructional model subcommittee, studied more than a dozen different models, and the different models that we considered can be found again in our plan for reopening schools. We discussed at length the pros and cons of each, with a primary focus on student and staff safety, as well as maximizing instructional time. As I mentioned 3 weeks ago, we were leaning towards a hybrid plan, and that sort of decision-making has shifted. Through this process, we have identified a specific hybrid plan that meets several considerations, and those can be found in Appendix B in our plan to reopen schools. It's a model where students come to school in cohorts, either in the morning or in the afternoon for a week, and then they are off the next week, and a different cohort comes in. While students are off, and so I'm clear, they're not they will continue to receive instruction. It's a week on with instruction, in-person instruction, a week off without. This model was attractive to us for a couple of reasons. One, it was one of the best models in addressing maintaining cohorts. And keep in mind that we're looking not just at cohorts relative to students mixing, but also students mixing with teachers. The other benefit of a week on, week off gives us a longer timeline if a student or a staff member shows symptoms of COVID-19. There'll be 9 days in between where we can respond accordingly. The other and an important component of this particular hybrid model is that it maximizes instruction. Students at JM, for example, will continue to take 6 periods of instruction during distance learning hybrid model. So all of those were taken into consideration in selecting that particular plan. Now, we'll be presenting that plan to the board again on July 21st, this coming Tuesday, for further discussion. And ultimately, we'll be asking the board to approve the recommendation to adopt that particular model.
So just let me make sure, I'm going to say it back to you to make sure I get it. So let's say there's a classroom of 23 kids, and I'm thinking elementary. I know JM's got probably a different group, but if you had 23 kids assigned to a teacher, or 24 kids, you'd separate them and you'd have like cohort A, cohort B, 12 and 12. And for 1 week, week 1, those 12 kids would come in as a group of 12 in either the morning or the afternoon, but only one of them. And then the next group of 12 would come week 2 in either the morning or the afternoon. Is that right?
So cohort A would come in the morning, and cohort B would receive instruction via distance learning in the afternoon. And then they would flip the next week. Got it.
Okay. So any kid on any given day is having a full day of schooling. And the question is whether or not it's half of that is going to be in the schoolhouse itself.
Correct.
Okay. Got it. So I know that you have gotten a lot of feedback from the end of the school year as far as how the schools pivoted to doing distance learning. And I think everyone understood that, people did their very best, and teachers were incredibly flexible and nimble, and so was administration, but that it wasn't always a smooth, high quality learning environment because nobody thought it was coming. But I was listening to the school board study session on the 16th, that meeting, which is available for everybody on Zoom in a listening capacity. And so will the upcoming one, I assume. So plug to listen in on that. But I heard that there was a lot of commitment to augmented instruction in a distant learning environment out of concern that a lot of parents felt that their kids simply weren't able to really learn or really get what they needed to be getting out of the spring run. Any thoughts on sort of what's the plan for how does that improve this round?
Yeah, important question. So number one, next steps have already started per our task force to reopen schools. So they began responding to the 3 parent surveys, 2 of which were conducted during last spring's distance learning, and 1 at the very end. We got a tremendous amount of feedback.
Yeah.
And we got other feedback along the way, via email, phone calls, that kind of thing. So number one, our distance learning plan has already received attention from our task force. Now, it's not complete. It is a work in progress, but that work began mid-June, again, based on the surveys. We had a tremendous number of public comment at last week's meeting, so we clearly recognized the need to improve distance learning. As I noted, we have new requirements to meet per Senate Bill 98. So there'll be daily instruction, more accountability, tracking, weekly monitoring. We'll have to address devices and connectivity, content that is grade level appropriate, substantially equivalent, if I recall the wording precisely, to in-person instruction. In addition, though, I'd like to make a couple of comments about distance learning, and you sort of touched on them. Last spring, teachers were thrust into a very short period of time to take the insides of their classrooms, manipulatives, working bulletin boards that teachers refer to, supplies, their electronic whiteboards, and more, and somehow find a way to provide at least a similar teaching condition over the internet.
Yeah.
We know that we cannot duplicate the inside of a teacher's classroom over the internet clouds. But we do know we can and will improve distance learning. And I ask our parents and our community for a little bit of patience and understanding, especially with our teachers who are facing the exact same conditions that I've heard from so many parents about their jobs, supporting their children at home with distance learning and with childcare. And I'm reminded of a 4th grade teacher in one of our schools with 4 very young children of her own who will be asked to provide and deliver distance learning while caring for her own kids and while providing them support during distance learning. The bottom line message that I would like to communicate is we recognize the unique challenges that we faced. We have far more experience. We have teachers who understand the platforms for delivery, and we are committed to improving a distance learning program that is far better than what we rolled out last spring.
I'm hopeful that the teachers are on their much needed break, especially given what they were asked to deliver in the last 2 months of school last year. But if they are on break, as their contract would ask them to be now, when are they going to get the in-service training required to ramp them up to any new sort of learning management system that is going to be in place?
Yeah, just a quick note about our teachers on break. About 10 of them have been working on our task force since mid-June every single day. My hat's off to them for their dedication because they have volunteered their time. By the way, all of our principals who usually get the month of July off have been working every single day since the end of the school year. So that work has, there have been contributions from our staff throughout the summer. To answer your question specifically, we have 2 staff development days prior to the start of school that we can fully dedicate to preparing our teachers. But we're not waiting until then. I'm meeting with every single teacher over 7 meetings next week to ask how we can begin answering their questions relative to the support that the district can provide them in anticipation of what kind of professional development we need to provide. I am also working with our labor partners for the purpose of looking at existing staff development days in October, January, and March, and potentially moving one or more to the beginning of the school year, should we need additional time to build the capacity of our teachers to meet these new demands of distance learning.
Yeah. So I'm going to zoom out to sort of big picture politics for a minute, because it seems like an appropriate time. For you all to purchase the required safety and health and safety equipment, but also the required curriculum, and to provide the professional development that you need your teachers to have going forward in a distance learning or hybrid model, it takes money. And I know that the federal government right now has certainly put a thumb on the scale, requesting that, or pressuring people to be opening their schools, and with some suggestions that money may be withheld if schools are not in compliance. Other people would respond and say, we cannot open schools without federal money. I'm not sure if the cart comes before the horse or vice versa. I don't know that you want to get into politics, but how will the schools be impacted if the federal money is not available?
Yeah, important question, and I appreciate you asking, because I think it's important to keep in mind that COVID-19 has had a direct impact on California school district revenue.
Yeah.
The 2021 budget is flat. And I mentioned that because 70% of school districts prior to this year's budget being adopted, as is the Moraga School District, are experiencing structural deficits. Flat for the Moraga School District has, for next year, is connected to, if you will, in a budget that's already been reduced by over $600,000. The board made $300,000 reductions in June 3rd, and another $300,000+ June 9th. Again, prior to the state budget being adopted. So we've already purchased masks, shields, foggers, disinfect rooms, soap, cleaning supplies, hand sanitizer, sneeze guards, outdoor washing stations, and more. Certainly withholding any funding to schools will be impactful. If funds were withheld, Moraga School District could return to the budget reduction list that we worked from last spring and look at potential other reductions. Another option is to seek loans. But I also want to share that we have received some state money and first round of CARES Act money. So we're not starting completely flat. There is some state and federal support for us to make the purchases, as I just described, as well as fund additional planning to start the school year.
So given that money is going to be as tight as it's ever been, can you state some of the services that you already know are off the table that just simply cannot be funded for this new school year?
So we are planning to continue all services. However, and keep in mind, per the $600,000 in reduction that I mentioned, there are reductions in services. Ranging from teacher assistance to library service to decreased hours for district office staff. So I do not anticipate any programs or services ending. There may be limits or reductions in comparison to the levels that we provided last school year.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to the teachers. You mentioned that you've got a lot of teachers, and this doesn't surprise me, who are basically doing the pro bono summer work because they care. And administrators, I mean, I saw people on the call. I saw Miss Guidi, Miss Inzio, Mr. Sullivan. That's just my little world. My question is, obviously, there are stakeholders in this as well, and if a teacher has expressed concern about returning to the school environment once you are able to embrace a hybrid model, what is the plan for addressing them and their personal needs, whether or not they're high risk or not, and simply are just expressing that this is not what I signed up for?
Yeah, so we've surveyed our teachers to get a temperature reading, if you will. And as I recall, almost 2/3 were willing to come back and teach in a hybrid model. About, and I'll need to double check these numbers, 14% indicated that they would probably qualify for the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, in that they meet qualification for not coming to school. And about 23% or so indicated they prefer just to stay home. They don't qualify for FFCRA, but like so many, they might have some concern or fears about coming in. So we are hopeful that through a hybrid model that we can provide accommodations to those teachers while also meeting the needs for in-person instruction. So, for example, if we have X number of teachers who are unable to come in because they qualify based on FFCRA, but they're still interested in working, they could support in-person instruction via distance learning because that portion is still part of the hybrid model. In addition, we anticipate that some students will not come to school via a hybrid model.
Yeah.
And they will be participating in something that we're calling distance learning choice, or DLC. And those students will need support from credentialed teachers. So we can utilize staff that way. This is what we envision at this time. Our numbers may change a little bit between now and when we transition, but these are some of the ideas and plans that the task force committee vetted out over the last couple of months.
One thing that came up on the July 16th meeting was this idea of pods. It seemed to be encouraged and endorsed by at least one of the subcommittees as an innovative way to maybe supplement or support instruction, and also to address some of the social emotional concerns of kids being isolated in the current distant learning environment. Can you explain a little bit what these pods, the purpose of these pods, and how, maybe flesh it out a little bit if you can, if it's been formed enough?
Yeah, and I think it needs to be developed further, but the idea is, and it's mostly related to childcare, is there an opportunity for us to support a different model of childcare should the Moraga School District not provide childcare during distance learning? We hope to provide it during a hybrid model. And just as background, we're continuing to look at opportunities to provide, and we're working with the town of Moraga Parks and Recreation, their director, to see how we could collaborate to provide some childcare opportunities. So the pod idea, and I recall an example from our task force, is one where 5 families, ideally with the students in the same cohort at school, work together in sort of a co-op where their kids could study together, they could do childcare together, and the parent overseeing those 5 kids would rotate on a day-to-day basis, something like that. The idea being keeping cohorts cohorts together via smaller groups or pods, and sharing the responsibility of distance learning or childcare on a rotating basis.
Yeah, I mean, my kids are going to camp in that cohort, small bubble rotation. It seems to be working. So I think that does make a lot of sense. My follow-up question about the pods are, I got an email and it's like, pods, we got to think about pods now. And all of a sudden I'm like emailing all my friends about pods. Is it a little bit premature to be actually creating the pods, in the sense that we sort of need to know who is in what assigned cohort first, and then it makes sense to create pods? Or if community is able to organize pods before the schools are able to assign teachers and cohorts and create the hybrid model, could that be the driver for teacher assignments if there's already a cohort?
So I would recommend at this time that they actually not. We're going to build our classes based on student achievement, number of English language learners, students with disabilities, boys, girls, as much as we possibly can. And it would be at that point that I'd suggest parents create their pods. And I would also encourage parents to look at the science relative to COVID-19 transmission, because there might be a little bit of leeway there relative to kids age 10 and less, who we know, again, via science, are not transmitting COVID-19 as are, people older than age 10. So there could be some flexibility in those smaller groups, and less as kids get older. But to answer your question more directly, my encouragement would be to not form those pods until our class lists have been created.
Okay. So my last question to you is one about the public comment. So I found the school board study session was the first one I've ever attended. I was driving back from Carmel listening to it, and it was long, but it was really interesting. And I know there's a lot of different subcommittees, and we can't break them all down right now, but everyone gave sort of an update on where they stand and some decisions that they've made. And there was a lot of public comments. Was there any public comments that then you read them out? Not you, but everybody just sort of was assigned a chunk of them. Were there any public comments that were shared during that meeting that sort of piqued your interest as a group, that you all wrote down and went, wait a minute, we're on to something here? Because obviously it takes a village to come up with great ideas, and some could have landed in that moment that were really ones to seize upon.
I would say that what piqued my interest, and as somewhat anticipated, is there wasn't consensus from parents about how to start school. And I think that was important to hear from a variety of different people relative to their interests in how we should start school.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that because that's really important. There's no way to satisfy the parents of 1,860 kids. Our decision making has been based on science, the number of resources from the CDC, the California State Health Department, down to our local health department, our county office. So that was one. The other that really resonated with me is parents want some change with distance learning. That was a common public comment, and we've talked about that a little bit today, but those are our marching orders right now, to improve the delivery and content and quality of distance learning. So that was a huge takeaway, reinforced, if you will, the survey information that we received from parents last spring.
Well, Bruce, you have your work cut out for you. And I know it's a tough time for all of us, but you are in an unenviable position to put together a puzzle without all the pieces. And like you said, you're not going to be able to please everyone, but hopefully the community will give some some grace and some have some compassion to the fact that it can be an agile process, and when things don't work right, then we know it and then we correct. So there can be a lot of course correction, hopefully, going forward.
Yeah, and thank you for that. We will be developing very high expectations and accountability systems, and we expect the public to hold us accountable. That's their job, and we are going to do our very best to meet those expectations.
Yeah. All right. Well, Bruce, again, thank you so much for everything you do. I appreciate you being on here. I appreciate you answering so many questions, and it's going to be okay. We'll figure it all out. But I think everybody knows that we're in as good a hands as we can in this community, with well-intended people and a lot of expertise and a lot of experience, and it'll all work out.
Thank you. I would just like to add, we take our job very seriously, and our decision making is keenly focused with kids at the forefront.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a wonderful evening. I hope you enjoy some of this summer, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you, Jennifer.
All right. Bye-bye.